the police officers placed checkpoint along Aurora Boulevard, and at about 3 o'clock in the morning, there was this van. The van was swerving from one lane to another. And so the police officers stopped the van. And the driver indeed stopped. And when the said van stopped, the police officers trained their flashlight on the said van. But they are not satisfied. And so they told the driver to get out of the said van, as he will be subjected to a body search, and the van will be subjected also to a search. But the driver lowered down the window of his van, and the driver told the police officer, "Sir, plain view lang po. Plain view lang po." But the police officer got angry at the response of the driver of the van. And so they forcibly took the driver out, and thereafter brought the driver to the police station. Later, the said driver was charged and was charged of the crime of resistance and serious disobedience under Article 151. Under Article 151, the law punishes two acts. One is resistance and serious disobedience, and the other one is simple disobedience. Resistance and serious disobedience has the following elements. First, that a person in authority or an agent of person in authority is engaged in the performance of his function or gives a lawful order. Second, that the offender seriously resisted or seriously disobeys the said order. And lastly, the said serious disobedience does not amount to direct assault, indirect assault, or disobedience to someone. The other act punished under Article 151 is simple disobedience. The elements of simple disobedience are that an agent of person in authority is engaged in the performance of his function or gives a lawful order. Second, that the offender disobeys the said order. And lastly, the disobedience is not serious in nature. In case of resistance and serious disobedience, the one giving the lawful order can either be a person in authority or an agent of person in authority. Whereas, in case of simple disobedience, the one giving the order is only an agent of person in authority. Likewise, in case of resistance and serious disobedience, the act of disobeying the order is done serious in nature. Whereas in case of simple disobedience, it is not serious in nature. In the problem that I gave, the case filed against the police officers was violation of Article 151, resistance and serious disobedience. The case filed by the police officers against the man is resistance and serious disobedience. Is X, the driver of the van, liable of resistance and serious disobedience under Article 151? First element, that a person in authority is engaged in the performance of his function or gives a lawful order. Supreme Court said, the police officers at this time are not in the performance of their functions and their order is not lawful. Supreme Court said, the order of the said police officers telling the said man to get out of the van as he will be subjected to a body search and the van to a search also is not a lawful order. Supreme Court said, this police officer did not catch him in the actual act of committing a crime. He was not caught in flagrante delicto committing a crime. Therefore, there is no way the police officer should have subjected him to any kind of search. Therefore, the order is not lawful. Second element, that the offender disobeys the said order, seriously disobeys. Supreme Court said, the refusal of X to be subjected to a search cannot be considered as disobedience, but an exercise of his right, an exercise of his right to privacy. He should not be subjected to a search as he was not caught in the act of committing a crime. So in this case, although X was convicted after the Court of Appeals, the Supreme Court acquitted X. Under Article 150, the law punishes disobedience to summons, issued by Congress. There was this Senator Pimentel, Senator Coco Pimentel, delivered a privilege speech in the halls of the Senate. In his privilege speech, Senator Pimentel stated some anomalous transaction at the Department of Public Works and Highways in the construction of several streets, several highways in the previous administration. He narrated each and every anomalous contract. And he stated also the former secretary, undersecretary, and assistant secretary of the DPWH as the ones involved in the said anomalous contract. And Senator Pimentel was asking the Senate to conduct an investigation. And so the committee chair, the chairman for the Senate Committee on Public Works, immediately called for a meeting, an investigation of the said privilege speech, of the said contract. And because of this, the chairman of the Senate Committee on Public Works issued summons to all those named by Senator Pimentel in his privilege speech. One of these was Undersecretary W. Undersecretary W received the summons. Upon receipt of the summons, he knew his involvement in the said transaction, and it was discovered he was so afraid. His blood pressure rose. In fact, he lost consciousness, and so he was immediately brought to the hospital. On the day of the hearing, he failed to appear. Is he liable for disobedience to summons? Under Article 150, the following acts are punished as disobedience to summons. By refusing without legal excuse to obey the summons issued by Congress, its standing or special committees, constitutional commissions, or subdivisions thereof. By refusing to be sworn in or be placed under affirmation while being before such legislative or constitutional body or official. By refusing to answer any legal inquiry or to produce any books, papers, documents, or records in his possession when required by such legislative or constitutional body to do so. Fourth, by restraining another to attend as a witness in such legislative or constitutional body. And lastly, by inducing disobedience to summons or refusal to be sworn before such legislative or constitutional body or official. These are the acts punished as disobedience to summons. The case in the problem falls under the first act. Under the first act, for one to be liable, it is necessary that his failure to appear, his refusal to appear was without any legal reason. If there is a legal, valid, justifiable reason, he cannot be liable for disobedience to summons. In the problem, Undersecretary X has a valid reason. He was in the hospital, he was suffering from high blood pressure, therefore, he was prevented from appearing in the said meeting, therefore, his non-appearance, his disobedience to the summons cannot be considered as punishable act under Article 150. He has a valid reason. In the second problem, or in the second act punished, the accused received the summons coming from Congress. He appeared. But once in the meeting, once in the presence of the members of Congress, he refused to answer any legal inquiry. He refused to be sworn in. He refused to produce papers, books in his possession. If, however, his reason for doing so is that the production of the books, the answer of the inquiry, will incriminate him to a criminal case, then he has the reason not to produce the books, not to answer the legal inquiry. Under the fourth act punished, the offender prevented someone from appearing in the said legislative inquiry. And under the last act, he induces another in order to disobey the summons. Congress has the power to issue summons because Congress has the power to investigate. The investigation done by Congress is not to file a case against any person. The investigation was done only in aid of legislation to better the laws that they are preparing. Under Article 153, the law punishes tumults and disturbance of public order. The acts punished as tumults and disturbance of public order are causing serious disturbance in any public place, office, or establishment. Then we have interrupting or disturbing public performances, peaceful gatherings, if the act is not included under Articles 131 and 132. Third act punish, making an outcry, tending to incite rebellion or sedition in any meeting, association, or public place. Fourth act punish, displaying placards or emblems which provoke a disturbance of public order in such meeting, association, or public place. And lastly, burying with pomp the body of a person who has been legally executed. If any of this act is done by more than 3 armed persons capable of producing violence, injury, it is said to be tumultuous in nature. Under the first act punished, it is necessary that the disturbance must be serious in nature and a planned one. So it is necessary that the offender deliberately intended to cause this serious disturbance in the public place. Under the second act punished, there is a qualification, provided the act is not included in Articles 132, 1 and 131. Article 131, prohibition, interruption, and dissolution of peaceful meetings. Under Article 132, interruption of religious worship. So how is Article 153, disturbance of public order, different from Articles 131 and 132? Article 153 can be committed by any person. It can be committed by a public officer or employee or a private individual. Whereas, Articles 131 and 132 can be committed only by public officers because they are under Title II, crimes against the fundamental law of the state. But what if the offender is a public officer? How would you know if he committed violation of Article 153, disturbance of public order, or violation of Article 131, prohibition, interruption, and dissolution of peaceful meetings, or Article 132, interruption of religious worship? The following are the distinctions. Under Article 153, the public officer is a participant in the meeting that he dissolved, that he interrupted. Whereas in Articles 131 and 132, the public officer is not a participant in the said meeting or in the said gathering. Second, in case of Article 153, the intent of the said public officer is to cause disturbance of public order. Whereas in case of Article 131, the intent of the public officer is to prevent a person from freely exercising his freedom of speech, freedom of expression. So that is the distinction between the two in order to determine what crime has been committed. If the offender happens to be a public officer. The third and the fourth act punish, making an outcry, and the other one is displaying placards or emblems. The act of making an outcry, the act of displaying placards and emblems must arise from some unconscious outburst of emotions brought about by the incident or circumstances that took place during the said meeting or gathering. In other words, there is no deliberate intent to incite the people to commit rebellion, to commit sedition. Because if the deliberate intent is to incite people to commit rebellion or sedition, the crime committed is not Article 153, but inciting to rebellion, inciting to sedition. And the last act punished, burying with pomp the body of a person who has been legally executed. A person is said to be legally executed when he committed a heinous crime, the penalty is death, and that penalty had been executed. If members of the family and friends would bury him with such extravagance as if he is a hero, burying him with pomp, they can be liable under Article 153. For in doing so, they would be arousing sympathy among the people, telling the people that the state committed a big mistake in executing the said death penalty. So it will give rise to disturbance of public order. Under Article 154, the law punishes unlawful use of means of publication. A new law was about to be promulgated. Some members of this, members of the Bayan Muna were against this new law. And so what did they do? They prepared leaflets. In the leaflets, they were encouraging the people not to comply with the law. And they stated therein the negative effects and that it is in violation of the Constitution. And they signed their members of Bayan Muna. Thereafter, these members went to different public places, in the market, in the public parks, and thereafter they distributed these leaflets. They will be saying, basahin nyo. So, they will be distributing these leaflets. They were caught by the police doing so. They were arrested. Are they liable for inciting to sedition, or are they liable for unlawful use of means of publication under Article 154? They are liable for violation of Article 154 and not inciting to sedition. Why not inciting to sedition? Why violation of Article 154? Because in the leaflets, they were only encouraging the people to disobey the law, not to comply with the law. They were not encouraging the people to go out of the streets to uprise and disobey the law. Absent that statement in the leaflets that they are encouraging the people to uprise publicly, it cannot be inciting to sedition. Hence, the crime committed is unlawful use of means of publication under Article 154. The following acts are considered punished as unlawful use of means of publication. First, by publishing or causing to be published by means of printing, lithography, or any other means of publication as news, any false news, which may endanger public order or cause damage to the interest or credit of the state. Or, by encouraging disobedience to the law, or by praising, justifying, or extolling an act punished by law, by the same means of publication, or by means of speeches, or by means of words, utterances. Third act punished, by maliciously publishing or causing to be published any official resolution or document without proper authority, or before they had been published officially. And lastly, by printing, publishing, or distributing, or causing to be printed, published, or distributed, books, pamphlets, periodicals, or leaflets, which do not bear the real printer's name or which are classified as anonymous. These acts are punished as unlawful use of means of publication. The problem that I gave falls on the second act. These members of Bayan Muna were encouraging disobedience to this new law by means of the leaflets that they were distributing. Hence, the crime committed is violation of Article 154. Under the first act punished, it is necessary that the said news that has been published, it is necessary that the publisher, the author, knew it is false. Nevertheless, they publish the same. If the said news would affect the interest and credit of the state, then the offender would become liable for violation of Article 152. So publication of fake news that will cause damage to the interest or credit of the state, the offender can be held liable under Article 154, unlawful use of means of publication. After the third act punished, it is necessary that the publication of the official resolution and document without proper authority must be done with malice. It must be done with deliberate intent on the part of the person who publishes the same. Under the fourth act, any kind of publication which do not bear the real printer's name or which are classified as anonymous will make the offender criminally liable under Article 154. There were many people in the public market. It was market day. It was Sunday. There were many people there in the public market busy buying things. Here comes X. X wanted to disturb these people. And so what X did? He went in the middle of the public market and he fired 2 shots up in the air. The people were so afraid. Those were gunshots, gunfires, and so they immediately left the place. What crime is committed by X? X is liable for alarms and scandals under the first act. The following acts under Article 155 are punished as alarms and scandals. First, by discharging any firearms, rockets, firecrackers, or other explosives within any town or public place calculated to cause alarm and danger. Second, by instigating or taking active part in any charibari or disorderly meeting offensive to another or prejudicial to public peace and tranquility. Third, by disturbing the public peace while wandering about at night or while engaged in any other nocturnal amusement. And lastly, by causing any disturbance or scandal in public places, whether intoxicated or not, provided Article 153 is not applicable, provided Article 153 is not violated. The problem that I gave falls under the first act. Here is a man, there was this public place, and he fired shots in the air intending to disturb this public market. It caused alarms and scandals among the people, disturbance of public peace and order. Hence, he becomes liable for alarms and scandals. X played basketball in a public basketball court open for everybody. It is a public place. He played basketball against another team. However, the team of X lose. He cannot accept the loss. And so he was so mad. He threw the ball, and then thereafter, he began scolding all the people there. The other playmates, as well as the people there watching. No one in particular. He is not stating foul words against anyone in particular, but to all the people in particular. There was a commotion. The police arrived and they arrested X. What case may the police file against X? Is it alarms and scandal under Article 155, or is it disturbance of public order under Article 153? It should be alarms and scandals under Article 155, 4th Act. It is alarms and scandal by causing any disturbance or scandal in public place, whether intoxicated or not. Why not Article 153? Because it is not serious in nature and it is not a planned one. In case of disturbance of public order under Article 153, First Act, causing any serious disturbance in a public place, office, or establishment. It is necessary that the offender went there to cause serious disturbance. It is a planned one and it is a serious one. In this case, thus a disturbance caused by X is not serious in nature, it is not a planned one, it happened at the sparkly moment as he could not accept defeat in the said basketball game. Therefore, it is alarms and scandals. Under Article 156, the law punishes delivering prisoners from jail. The elements of delivering prisoners from jail are first, that there is a person confined in jail or any other penal institution, and the said offender removes him from jail or assisted in the removal of this person from jail. The penalty is qualified if the act of delivering or removing the prisoner from jail is attended by violence, intimidation, or bribery. The prisoner being referred to can be any kind of prisoner. He can be a prisoner convicted by final judgment, or he can be a mere detention prisoner. The offender can also be anybody. The offender can be a public officer or employee. The offender can come from the outside or come from the inside, an inmate or an employee of the penal institution. He can be anybody for as long as he remove the said prisoner from the penal institution. However, Article 156 cannot be committed by the custodian of the said prisoner. If it is the custodian of the prisoner who removes him from jail, who assisted in his escape from the penal institution, the crime committed by the said custodian would be infidelity in the custody of prisoner, which can either be of two kinds under Article 223 Infidelity in the custody of the prisoner by conniving or consenting with the escape of the prisoner. Or under Article 224, infidelity in the custody of the prisoner by evasion through negligence. So in either way, the custodian can be liable for infidelity. It is infidelity and not delivering prisoners from jail because when the person who removes the said prisoner from jail is the custodian, there is a breach of the trust and confidence reposed on him by the state to be the custodian of this prisoner who is an accountability of the state. Related to Article 156, Article 157, evasion of service of sentence. The elements of evasion of service of sentence are first, that the offender is a prisoner convicted by final judgment. Second, that he is serving a sentence which involves deprivation of liberty. And last element requires that he escapes during the term of his sentence. So these are the elements of evasion of service of sentence. Evasion, whatever be the kind, can only be committed by a prisoner convicted by final judgment. A mere detention prisoner cannot commit evasion of service of sentence because a mere detention prisoner has yet no sentence to evade. He is only there because he happens to commit an unbailable offense or that he has no money to post bail. So, he is a mere detention prisoner. He has yet no sentence to evade, therefore, a detention prisoner cannot commit evasion of service of sentence. So the offender must be a prisoner convicted by final judgment. The second element requires that the said offender is serving a sentence which involves deprivation of liberty. Sentence which involves deprivation of liberty, imprisonment, and desterro. Desterro, as I said yesterday, also involves partial deprivation of liberty because a person sentenced with desterro is prohibited from entering the place designated in the judgment of the court. If he enters the place, he becomes liable under Article 157. Third element requires the said offender escapes during the term of his sentence. The following circumstances will qualify the penalty in evasion of service of sentence under Article 157. First, if the escape is done by means of unlawful entry. Second, if the escape is done by breaking any wall, roof, floor, door, or window. Or, if the escape is done by means of false keys, pick-locks, disguise, deceit, violence, or intimidation. Or if the escape is done through connivance with other inmate or employee of the penal institution. Any of these will qualify the imposable penalty in case of evasion of service of sentence under Article 157. X is a prisoner convicted by final judgment. While X was inside the penal institution, he has a dear friend who often visits him. The friend would always visit X, and because of this, frequent visits by the friend Y to X, friend Y has already befriended the custodian of X. And so the custodian of X became lax on Y. Whenever Y would visit X, the custodian would no longer bodily search and frisk X and frisk Y because of friendship. So one time, Y visited X. The custodian didn't anymore frisk him. And so, Y was able to smuggle inside a gun. And he gave the gun to X. And thereafter, he left. That night, X pretended to be talking to the custodian. While he was pretending to be talking to the custodian, X poked the gun, or the knife, at the said custodian, and told the custodian to open the cell and to allow him to leave. Afraid A weapon was pointed at him. He opened the cell, and X was able to have a successful escape. Upon his escape, the moment he left, he went to another friend, W. He told W he escaped from the penal institution while he was serving this final sentence. He doesn't want to rot in jail. And so W said, "You are safe in my place." And he hid and concealed X. What are the criminal liabilities of X, the friend Y, the custodian, and the friend W? Insofar as X is concerned, he is a prisoner convicted by final judgment. Therefore, when he escapes and evaded the term of his sentence, he becomes liable for evasion of service of sentence. Since he used a gun and poked it at the said custodian to be able to have a successful escape, the said evasion is qualified by intimidation. So it is evasion of service of sentence qualified by intimidation. Insofar as Y the friend is concerned, Y is liable for delivering prisoners from jail under Article 156. Were it not for the gun that he gave to X, X would not be able to escape. X would not be able to threaten the custodian, and he would not be able to escape. Therefore, Y assisted in the escape, in the removal of X from the penal institution. Hence, Y is liable under Article 156. Insofar as the custodian is concerned, the custodian is liable under Article 224, infidelity in the custody of prisoners by evasion through negligence. There was negligence on the part of the custodian. It is his duty to frisk, search, any visitor. Yet, out of friendship, he did not do so. Such failure to search Y, the visitor, amount to a deliberate non-performance of his official function as the custodian. Therefore, it amounted to evasion through negligence under Article 224, a form of infidelity in the custody of prisoners. Insofar as the friend W is concerned, the one who hide and conceal X, he will be liable for obstruction of justice under PD 1826. Is he not liable as an accessory? He is not liable as an accessory. First, there is no mention of the crime committed. And second, there is no mention as to the crime committed by the said person of X. If, however, there is a mention of the crime, then you can determine whether it is an accessory or not of violation of PD 1826, obstruction of justice. The other kind of evasion of service of sentence is found under Article 158. That is evasion of service of sentence in times of disorder. The elements are first, the offender again is a prisoner convicted by final judgment. Second, he is serving his sentence in a penal institution. Third, there is a disorder arising from conflagration, earthquake, explosion, or any other catastrophe or a mutiny in which he has not participated. Third element, that he left the penal institution in times of this calamity or disorder. And lastly, that he failed to give himself up to the prison authorities within 48 hours following the proclamation by the Chief Executive that the calamity had lapsed. These are the elements of evasion under Article 158. Just like in Article 157, evasion of service of sentence in times of disorder can be committed only by a prisoner convicted by final judgment. But under Article 158, note there is a second requirement. It is necessary that this prisoner convicted by final judgment must be serving his sentence in a penal institution. Therefore, if the final sentence is zero, Article 158 would not apply. It is necessary, the law requires, he must be serving his sentence in a penal institution. Then, there is this calamity, there is this catastrophe. And he left. Upon leaving, he is not liable. He becomes liable only under Article 158 if he failed to return, surrender, give himself up to the prison authorities within 48 hours following the declaration of the passing away of the said calamity. A strong earthquake hit Manila, and among those hit were in the New Bilibid prison, and the prisoners therein left. That includes X. There are prisoners convicted by final judgment, and X left the penal institution during the said earthquake. X went to the house of a friend. About a day after, he was listening over the radio. X heard the president, followed by the director of prison, saying that the calamity had lapsed, and the president gave an order: all those who left, all prisoners who left the penal institution must return. And so, X, instead of returning, went into further hiding. From one friend to another, from one house of his friend to another, he began hiding. The police officers could not locate him. A year thereafter, he was found, he was arrested. What karma crimes has been committed by X? What is the effect of such escape on his criminal liability? He will be charged with evasion of service of sentence in times of calamity under Article 158. And in case of conviction, he shall be sentenced with a penalty equivalent to 1/5 of the term of the sentence, but in no case to exceed 6 months. That will be the penalty that shall be imposed on him. If he returns, I think I discussed this already while discussing Article 98 in Book 1. If he returns, there is 1/5 deduction based on the term of his sentence. If he stayed put, there is 2/5 deduction based on the term of his sentence. Any problem, if he failed to give up to the prison authorities within 48 hours and he was arrested, the basis of the 1/5 will be the remainder of the sentence, but in no case to exceed 6 months. But if it is for the benefit, the basis is 1/5 based on the term of the sentence. The third kind of evasion of service of sentence is under Article 159. Evasion of service of sentence by violation of the conditional pardon. Here, the offender again is a prisoner convicted by final judgment. He was granted conditional pardon by the chief executive, and he violated the terms of his pardon. For having violated the terms of his pardon, he becomes criminally liable under Article 159. What are the penalties to be imposed in case of violation of conditional pardon, evasion of service of sentence by violation of conditional pardon under Article 159? If the penalty remitted by the grant of pardon does not exceed 6 years, a new penalty for having violated the conditional pardon shall be imposed on him, which is prisión correccional in its minimum period. But if the penalty remitted by the grant of pardon exceeds or is more than 6 years, no new penalty shall be imposed on him. He shall only be required to serve the remainder of his sentence. So there was this bar question once. The question in the bar is Article 159, evasion of service of sentence by violation of conditional pardon, a substantive offense? Your answer is, it depends, and you qualify as provided for under Article 159. Under Article 159, if the penalty remitted by the grant of pardon does not exceed 6 years, a new penalty shall be imposed on the offender, which is prisión correccional, in its minimum period. In this case, Article 159 is a substantive offense because a new penalty is imposed on the offender. But if the penalty remitted by the grant of pardon is more than, exceeds 6 years, no new penalty is imposed on him, even if he violated the terms of the pardon. he will only be required to serve the remainder of his sentence. In this case, Article 159 is not a substantive offense because no new penalty is imposed on the offender. Article 160 is quasi-recidivism, and I think I have discussed it while I was discussing the different forms of habituality in aggravating circumstances. We go to Title 4, Crimes Against Public Interest. Under Article 161, the law punishes the person who forged the Great Seal of the Republic of the Philippines, the signature of the President, or the stamp of the President. Therefore, it punishes the forger. Article 162 punishes the person who, despite knowledge that a document contains the forged signature, forged stamp of the President, forged Great Seal of the Republic of the Philippines, still make use of the said document. He is not a forger, but he knew that this document in his possession contains this forgery, yet he used it. He is still liable, and the liability is under Article 162. Under 163, the law punishes 3 acts. We have counterfeiting of coins. We have also importing false coins, and the other one is uttering false coins. There is counterfeiting of coins when the offender imitates, copies the peculiar design of a genuine and authentic coin in order to produce a spurious one. There is importing of false coins when the offender brings into Philippine ports any counterfeited or falsified coins. And there is uttering of false coins when the offender gives from one person to another, circulates, passes from one person to another, any of these counterfeited or false coins. When you say counterfeiting, the subject coins can be any coins. It could be coins of present circulation. It could be old or vintage coins. It could be coins of foreign currency, for as long as it is genuine and authentic. Because in case of counterfeiting of coins, what is being punished is the offender's act of imitating, copying the peculiar design of this genuine and authentic coin, as opposed to Article 164, mutilation of coins. Mutilation of coins is the offender's act of scratching off part of the metal content of the coin and gathering the metal dust thereafter. In case of mutilation of coins, for the crime to arise, it is necessary that the coins mutilated must be those in present circulation. Those which are in present circulation, those of current currency. Because only then can the public be deceived. So mutilation, the crime will not apply if the coin mutilated is an old or vintage coin. If the coin mutilated is a coin of foreign currency. Only when the coin is of present circulation. Because if a coin of present circulation is mutilated, its content is scratched off. Any person in possession of the same will be deceived because there is a diminution on the intrinsic value of the said coin. Article 165 punishes 2 acts. We have possession of counterfeited or mutilated coins with intent to alter the same, despite knowledge that it is counterfeited or mutilated. And the other one is the act of actually altering these counterfeited or mutilated coins, despite knowledge that it is counterfeited or mutilated. In case of possession, for one to be liable under Article 165, it is necessary that he has the intent to alter these counterfeited or mutilated coins, and he has knowledge. He knew that the thing in his possession is counterfeited or mutilated coins. If he lacks knowledge, then he cannot be liable for possession of counterfeited or mutilated coins. Articles 166, 167, 168, and 169 refers to forgery of treasury or banknotes or any instrument payable to bearer or payable to order. How is forgery committed? Forgery is committed by giving to a treasury or banknote or any instrument payable to order or payable to better the appearance of a true and genuine document. Likewise, forgery is committed by erasing, substituting, counterfeiting, or altering by any means the words, signs, figures, or letters contained therein. That is how forgery is defined under Article 169. And that shall be your answer if the question is, how is forgery committed? If the question is in criminal law. That has been once asked in the bar. The question is simple. For 2%, how is forgery committed? Many gave long answers. The answer is very simple under Article 169. And there are only two acts, two ways of committing forgery under Article 169. You have 20 minutes break before I go to falsification.